Welcome, dear listeners. I'm so glad you've joined us tonight for another quiet mystery from the heart of Street Mary Mead. It's always a comfort to know this little corner of stories reaches so many of you, wherever you may be listening from. Tell me in the comments, where are you joining from tonight? A familiar village, a faraway city, or perhaps a place that feels a little like home. If these gentle mysteries bring you calm at the end of a long day, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new tale waiting by the firelight. Now, take a breath, pour your tea, and settle in. The hour is late, the lamps are low, and beyond the hedgerows of England, something stirs. Tonight's mystery begins with a sound no one should hear at dawn. The morning began like any other in the village. Soft mist lay over the fields. Crows stirred in the oak trees. A cart rolled past the vicarage, its wheels crunching on gravel. The air smelled of damp earth and bread from Mrs. Cottle's bakery. Doors opened, voices murmured, a dog barked once and fell quiet again. Everything moved in its slow, predictable rhythm. Nothing hurried in Street Mary Mead. At Foxglove Farm, Ben Harcourt stepped out of the byre, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. He glanced toward the sky, grey, calm, ordinary. Another day of chores, milk and fence repairs. He knew every sound of this place, every rustle of straw, every creak of the barn door. But today, something felt slightly wrong. The air seemed too still. The cows hadn't begun their low morning calls. He paused, listening. Silence pressed on his ears. Even the wind held back. Then, a noise cut through the calm. A bell. Once. Sharp. Then again. Louder. Ben froze, head turning toward the farmhouse. The dinner bell, large, iron, old, swung from the eaves. It wasn't noon. It wasn't evening. It was dawn, and it never rang at dawn. He waited for it to stop. It didn't. The strokes came uneven, panicked, as if the person holding the rope had lost control. A cold twinge ran through him. He started walking, then quickened his pace. The sound grew frantic, metal against air. A desperate rhythm. By the time he reached the gate, the ringing stopped. Just like that. Silence returned. Heavy. Wrong. Complete. Ben looked around. No smoke from the chimney. No one in the yard. Only the mist and that echo fading through the fields. He felt his pulse thump in his throat. Something had broken the morning. He called out once, no answer. Twice, still nothing. The stillness pressed harder now, like a held breath. He reached for the latch, his fingers trembling slightly. A door stood ajar somewhere ahead, moving faintly in the breeze. The bell rope hung loose, swaying like something alive. Ben stared at it, unease tightening in his chest. The bell rang once, then again, and didn't stop. Ben Harcourt crossed the yard slowly, boots scraping the cobblestones. The air hung heavy and pale. He could still feel the bell's echo inside his chest, that hollow metal sound that shouldn't have been. A chill slid through him as he passed the cattle stalls. The doors were open, though they were always shut before sunrise. Straw scattered across the threshold. Strange. He stopped, listening again. No movement, no voices. Even the cows were silent. A faint smell drifted out, hay mixed with something bitter, something that didn't belong. "Mr. Grant?" Ben called, voice shaking slightly. No reply. He tried again, louder this time. Only the dull creak of wood answered. He stepped closer, pushing the door wider. The hinges moaned. Cold air rolled from the darkness within. His eyes adjusted slowly, tracing the shapes inside feed barrels, milking pails, ropes and straw. Then he saw it. A body, face down, arms bent awkwardly at the elbows, grey hair matted against the floor. "Dear God," Ben whispered, his breath fogging in the chill. He dropped to his knees beside the fallen man, Oliver Grant, his jacket damp, his skin pale. The ground beneath him darkened where the straw was wet. Ben touched his shoulder, cold. No movement, no life. He swallowed hard, forcing his mind to think. Maybe a fall, maybe a heart stroke. But the position was wrong, too sudden, too final. His cap slipped from his hand. He backed away, trembling. The morning light pushed through the cracks in the boards, cutting narrow lines across the floor. One caught the bell rope through the open window. It glistened strangely, as if smeared with something oily. Ben stared, his thoughts spinning. Why ring the bell? Why at that hour? He stumbled out into the open air, gasping. The mist was thinning now, curling across the pasture in thin ribbons. He wiped his hands on his trousers, though nothing was on them. He wanted to run, to call someone, anyone. The farmhouse door stood slightly ajar. Inside, a chair had fallen over, and beyond it, stillness again. He turned toward the path that led to the road, ready to fetch the doctor, but then he stopped. A soft sound came from behind the barn. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, muffled by the fog. Ben froze, every muscle locked. Someone was there, someone watching. He turned toward the sound, but saw only the shifting white mist. He froze. Someone was watching from the mist. Ben hadn't moved from the yard when the first figure appeared through the mist. Small, composed, walking with steady, careful steps. Miss Jane Marple, her grey coat buttoned neat to the collar. A wicker basket looped over her arm. No hurry, no fear, just quiet observation, as though death itself was something she'd met before, politely, and never allowed to disrupt a morning. "Mr. Harcourt," she called softly. Her voice carried in that still air, clear and kind. "I do hope I'm not intruding. I brought strawberry runners for Mrs. Grant. She said she'd be planting a new bed this week." Ben turned toward her, pale and shaking. "Miss Marple, I think something's happened." Her pace didn't quicken, but her eyes sharpened. "Something." He pointed toward the open shed. "I found Mr. Grant, on the floor. He's gone, miss." Miss Marple nodded once, quietly, as though the world had confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Ah, I thought as much when I heard that dreadful bell. No one rings it at dawn, not unless something's wrong." She reached the shed, set down her basket, and peered in. Her movements were precise, almost delicate, not a step wasted, not a gesture out of place. She bent slightly, examining the scene without touching anything. Her sharp blue eyes moved from the straw to the door, to the pattern of footprints pressed into the damp floor. Ben hovered behind her, hat twisting in his hands. "Should I fetch the doctor?" "Yes," she said softly. "And the constable. But before you go, tell me, did you move anything?" He shook his head quickly. "Nothing, miss. Only touched his shoulder." "Good." That was sensible. She straightened, brushing a bit of dust from her glove, then her gaze shifted upward toward the open doorway. The bell rope. She walked over to it. The rope hung loose, the frayed end swinging gently in the draught. She stopped, just short of touching it, leaning close instead, studying the texture in the morning light. Her nose twitched slightly. "Curious," she murmured. Ben frowned. "What is it?" "Do you smell that?" He sniffed. "Can't say I do." "Maybe the barn oil?" "Not quite." Her voice was mild, but her eyes stayed on the rope. "Grease, perhaps. But not for machinery. This is kitchen grease." "Bacon, I think." "Bacon?" "Yes. Freshly used by the look." She straightened again, clasping her hands neatly in front of her. "Mr. Harcourt." The bell did not ring itself. Someone pulled it, and whoever did not wish to be recognized by what they left behind. Ben's eyes widened. "You mean—" Miss Marple didn't answer. Her gaze remained fixed on that faint shine along the coarse rope fibers. The morning breeze stirred it, and the sunlight caught the greasy sheen like a quiet signal waiting to be read. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak another word. Her eyes settled on the rope and stayed there. "Doctor." Haydock arrived within 20 minutes, his black motor coughing up the last of the lane's mist as he stepped out, bag in hand, face grave. He gave Ben a brief nod, then turned to Miss Marple. "You found him, did you?" "Mr. Harcourt did," she replied gently. "I merely arrived in time to confirm the matter." The doctor sighed. Oliver Grant, fit as a man of his age could be. Heart, lungs, all steady last month. He set the bag down, rolled his sleeves, and knelt beside the body. Professional hands. Steady. Practiced. Ben stood at the door, twisting his cap. Miss Marple, a few feet away, watched in silence. After a moment, Haydock leaned back. "Not a fall," he muttered. "No bruising consistent with collapse." He reached for his stethoscope, then paused. Pupils contracted, quite markedly. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "Ah." The doctor looked up, eyes narrowing. "Digitalis," he said shortly. "Foxglove. I'd stake my license on it." Ben blinked. "Foxglove, sir? That plant by the hedgerows?" "The same," Haydock said. "A dose large enough could stop the heart cleanly. Death within minutes." He rose, brushing dust from his knees. "Question is how he came to take it." Miss Marple spoke softly. "There are no foxgloves growing inside this shed, Doctor." Haydock nodded. "I noticed, which means either ingestion elsewhere or deliberate administration." Before he could say more, the growl of another motor car cut through the air. Inspector Slack. He strode across the yard with his usual impatience, coat unbuttoned, hat tilted back. "All right, then," he barked. "What's the excitement this time? Farmer dead probably ate the wrong leaves. Happens every spring." The doctor frowned. "I'd hesitate to call it accident. The symptoms—" Slack waved a hand. "Poison's poison. Some people can't tell tea from tincture." He glanced around, eyes narrowing on Miss Marple. "Ah, you're here again, Miss Marple. Always turn up when there's trouble, don't you?" She smiled faintly. "I do seem to find myself nearby, yes." Slack crouched, inspecting the body without interest. "No sign of struggle. No weapon. Must have brewed himself something foolish. People these days fancy herbal nonsense." Miss Marple tilted her head. "You think it's self-inflicted, Inspector?" "What else? The man's a farmer surrounded by poison. Easy mistake." She glanced toward the bell rope still glistening faintly in the doorway. "Then perhaps you can explain why the dinner bell was sounded at dawn." Slack scowled. "Superstition. Someone panicked." "Indeed." Her tone was mild, but her gaze lingered. "Still, an odd way to announce an accident, don't you think?" The doctor cleared his throat. "If you're finished arguing theories, Inspector, I'll have the body removed for post-mortem." "Do what you like," Slack muttered. "Though, I've already got my conclusion." Miss Marple turned slightly toward him, her voice soft, polite, but cutting through the silence like glass. "Of course, Inspector. Though I must say—" She looked once more at Oliver Grant's still hand, the pale rope, the faint shine of grease. "Most curious. Very curious indeed." The farmhouse kitchen smelled of heat and metal and something faintly bitter. Steam fogged the small window panes, blurring the world beyond into grey. Streaks. Mrs. Ivy Monk stood at the sink, hands moving mechanically over the breakfast dishes. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and her face, though calm, looked drained of all colour. Miss Marple sat at the table, small and neat, gloved hands folded in her lap. She studied the room quietly, the gleam of the copper pots, the ticking of the clock, the teapot on the hearth that still gave off the faintest hiss. It was a tidy kitchen, well ordered, well run. Yet beneath that order something trembled. "Such a dreadful thing, miss," Mrs. Monk said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was strain beneath it. "To think of poor Mr. Grant, and in his own shed too. It doesn't seem real." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "Death seldom does, when it arrives among familiar things." "Mrs.?" Monk nodded, eyes fixed on the water swirling down the drain. "He was up early this morning. I heard him moving before dawn. That was unlike him. Always took breakfast after checking the stock. Never before." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the teapot. "Did he take tea before he left the house?" The question came so softly it was almost casual. Mrs. Monk hesitated. "Why, yes, miss. I brewed him a pot myself. Chamomile, same as always." He said it, soothed his stomach. Miss Marple rose and moved closer to the table, her gaze resting on the brown earthenware pot. "Chamomile," she repeated, her tone mild. "Would you mind if I had a look?" Mrs. Monk blinked. At the tea, miss. If it's not inconvenient. The housekeeper hesitated, then lifted the lid. Steam curled upward, carrying with it a scent that made Miss Marple's nostrils tighten. It wasn't unpleasant floral, yes, but not the soft, apple-like note of chamomile. Something sharper lay beneath it, bitter and metallic. Miss Marple leaned closer, peering into the pot. A few petals floated near the strainer, purple and wilted, their colour bleeding faintly into the water. "How very curious," she murmured. Mrs. Monk shifted uncomfortably. I must have used the wrong jar. There's so many herbs about the place these days. Miss Rachel keeps them for her studies. All sorts of things. Perhaps I took the wrong one by mistake." Miss Marple's eyes flicked toward the shelf. Neatly labelled jars stood in a row. Everyone clearly marked. Chamomile, mint, foxglove, lavender. She said nothing for a long moment. Only the ticking clock filled the air. Finally she looked back at the pot, her voice calm, almost gentle, but the softness carried weight. "These are not chamomile leaves, Mrs. Monk." By late afternoon, word had already spread through the village. Not through newspapers or officials, but through whispers, clinking teacups, and doors half opened, just long enough to pass a sentence. At Mrs. Cottle's bakery, the smell of fresh scones mixed with quiet speculation. "They say it was poison," murmured Mrs. Larkin, leaning over the counter. Dr. Haydock himself confirmed it. Digitalis from Foxglove. "You'd think people would keep those things out of reach." Mrs. Cottle nodded solemnly, though her eyes gleamed with interest. "Poor Mr. Grant. Such a good man. Though I must say there were troubles at that farm. I heard whispers." "About the daughter?" "Yes. Miss Rachel married that young man, Giles Trent. Came from away. Handsome enough, but too fine for farm work. And they say Mr. Grant never trusted him." From a nearby table, Reverend Toppin cleared his throat politely. "Ladies, it is not Christian to speak ill of the bereaved." But even he leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Still, I did hear something myself. About debts. Gambling, perhaps." Miss Marple, sitting quietly in the corner with her tea, pretended not to listen. Her eyes moved between speakers, collecting each fragment of gossip, the way a gardener collects fallen seeds. She had learned long ago that gossip, properly sifted, often hid a core of truth. Mrs. Larkin continued, warming to the subject. "And then there's Mrs. Monk, loyal as they come. But you know how loyalty can turn. 15 years in that kitchen, running the household like a general. And then along comes young Rachel, taking charge of everything. That can rub a woman the wrong way." Mrs. Cottle sniffed. "Mrs. Monk's pride is her work. If anyone made a fool of her, or if she felt replaced." Now, Reverend Toppin interrupted, though not convincingly. "Let's not suggest wickedness where there may only be hurt feelings." Miss Marple stirred her tea, eyes half-lidded. She'd seen this pattern before. Kindness worn thin by resentment, affection soured by small humiliations. It was the village way. Every smile had a shadow behind it, and every shadow had a story. Outside, the church bell struck 4. Conversations paused, then resumed in lower tones. Someone mentioned an argument between Mr. Grant and the stableman. Someone else whispered that Rachel's marriage hadn't been happy. A clerk from the post office added that a strange letter had arrived at Foxglove Farm only yesterday. London postmark, no return address. Miss Marple looked up at that. A letter. London. No sender. She folded her napkin, set down her cup, and rose with her usual soft grace. "Such lively conversation," she said pleasantly. "Do carry on, won't you?" Mrs. Cottle blinked. "Going already, Miss Marple?" "Oh, yes," she replied, reaching for her gloves. "One hears enough in one sitting to last a lifetime." Her smile deepened, faint but knowing. Every secret in Street Mary Mead has roots, and one just moved. Inspector Slack arrived at the farmhouse again that evening, boots muddy, mood short. He pushed open the kitchen door without knocking. Miss Marple was already there, seated by the hearth, with a neat bundle of papers before her. The lamplight made small gold halos on the rim of her spectacles. Slack frowned. "I hope you're not going through evidence, Miss Marple. That's my department." She smiled mildly. "I should hardly call it evidence, Inspector. Merely something Mrs. Monk asked me to sort through. Old accounts, mostly." Slack crossed his arms. "Accounts, eh? Farmers' ledgers don't solve murders." "Sometimes," she said, "they do." Her tone was gentle, but it stopped him. She unfolded the top sheet, a worn ledger, pages smudged and brittle. Mr. Grant was meticulous with his records. Cows, crops, purchases. But notice these last few entries all in another hand. Slack leaned in, squinting. The ink was darker, fresher, the numbers uneven. "What of it?" Miss Marple pointed with her gloved finger. "Withdrawals. Significant ones. £40, then 80, then 100. All within 3 months. No matching receipts. And then this." She turned a page, revealing a single sheet folded between the entries. A letter. Slack unfolded it, reading aloud under his breath. "Dear Father, I cannot meet the payment this month. Giles insists I ask you again. It will be the last time. Signed, Rachel." He lowered it slowly. His daughter asking for money. Nothing new there. "Perhaps not," Miss Marple said. "But look at the date. 2 days before his death." Slack grunted. "Motive, you think?" "Not quite yet," she said softly. "But there's more. On the back." He turned it over. A note in Mr. Grant's handwriting. "Refused. Must not give another penny. Will speak to solicitor tomorrow." Slack whistled under his breath. "That's clear enough. A quarrel over money." Miss Marple nodded faintly. And yet, the solicitor never received a visit. Mr. Grant never made it beyond his own yard. Ben Harcourt, standing near the doorway, spoke hesitantly. "Sir, if I may, I heard them arguing last night. Mr. Grant and young Giles. I was closing the gate when I saw him leave the farmhouse. He looked, well, angry." Slack turned sharply. "How angry?" "Enough to forget his hat." Miss Marple didn't look up. Giles Trent, the son-in-law. A man in debt. A father-in-law unwilling to pay again. And then a death that cancels all debts and secures an inheritance for the widow. Slack exhaled through his nose, pacing once across the room. "So, that's it then. Rachel and her husband needed money, Grant refused, and someone decided to solve the problem." Miss Marple gathered the papers neatly, her expression unreadable. "Inspector, you may call it a quarrel over money. I call it something colder. Dependence turned to resentment. Gratitude soured into necessity. The most dangerous emotion of all." Slack grunted. "And what would you call it in plain English?" She met his gaze, her voice quiet but sharp enough to still the room. "That provides a very strong motive for murder." The next morning brought fog again, thinner, restless, curling along the hedges like breath. Inspector Slack was already in the barn when Miss Marple arrived, notebook in hand, looking pleased with himself. "Ah, Miss Marple," he said briskly. "Think we've got it this time. Simple as daylight." She tilted her head, mildly curious. "Have we indeed, Inspector?" He gestured toward a wooden crate near the wall. Inside it lay a small tin flask, half full, the metal cap stained faintly brown. "Found this in the loft above the stall, marked tonic. Smells of foxglove. Likely what killed him." Miss Marple leaned closer, but did not touch it. The smell was sharp, unmistakable, bitter and green, the ghost of poison. "Whose is it?" "Mrs. Monk's," Slack declared with satisfaction. "Her name's on the label. She told us herself she keeps the stock tonics up here. My guess she mixed the wrong bottle into his tea. Too proud to admit the mistake, so she kept quiet." He crossed his arms, clearly awaiting her approval. Miss Marple only smiled faintly. "Pride does make people quiet, Inspector, but guilt can make them noisy in odd ways." Slack frowned. "You think I'm wrong?" "I think," she said carefully, "that mistakes seldom climb ladders to hide themselves." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" She gestured toward the loft ladder. "Whoever put that bottle there had time, strength, and purpose. and no fear of heights. Mrs. Monk, however, is nearly 60, and I doubt she's climbed anything higher than her pantry stool in years. Slack's face tightened. She could have asked someone to hide it. She could, Miss Marple agreed. But would she know it needed hiding so quickly? The flask smells of freshly handled metal, and the dust on that beam is disturbed in only one place, just enough for a man's boot, not a woman's house shoe. Slack followed her gaze reluctantly. Above them, the beam showed a clean oval patch where the dust had been brushed away. He muttered under his breath, then looked back toward the door. Giles Trent again. Perhaps, she said softly. But do note something else, Inspector. The bottle itself. He frowned, lifting it carefully with a cloth. What about it? The label is written in a different hand. The ink hasn't faded at all. New letters over old scratches. Someone wanted it to look like Mrs. Monk's property. Slack's brows drew together. You mean planted? I mean intended, Miss Marple replied gently. Planted things grow only if no one notices the soil has been disturbed. Slack cursed under his breath. I'll have that man brought in. Trent's been lying from the start. Miss Marple didn't reply. She glanced instead toward the doorway, where faint tracks cut through the dust, small, narrow, pressed deep at the heel. Curious, she murmured. Slack turned. What now? Those are Mrs. Monk's boots, she said softly. She may not have climbed the ladder, but she's been here since the bottle was placed. Slack froze. Then she, Miss Marple shook her head slowly. Not necessarily. She might have followed someone, or found what she wasn't meant to see. Her gaze moved from the floor to the window, where the mist swirled like smoke over the fields. Truth hides well, Inspector, but footprints, they always try to tell the truth, even when the mouth cannot. Slack rubbed his chin, uneasy now, confidence slipping. Then, what do you make of it, Miss Marple? She turned toward him, eyes sharp behind her calm smile. The flask may lie, Inspector, but her boots told a different story. The village slept under a thin veil of mist. The moon hung low, pale as bone, and every window on the lane had gone dark hours ago. Only one small figure moved among the hedgerows, careful, soundless, almost part of the night itself. Miss Marple carried no lantern. She knew these paths well enough not to need one. The air smelled faintly of soil and rain, the kind that lingers after sunset. Her shoes made no sound on the damp earth as she reached the gate of Foxglove Farm. The barn door stood slightly ajar, creaking softly as the breeze touched it. Somewhere inside, a shadow shifted. Two voices murmured low, urgent. She stopped just short of the threshold, her breath slow, her heart steady, listening. The first voice was male, sharp, whispered anger. Told you to get rid of it, not hide it here. The second voice, a woman's, trembling, defensive. I couldn't burn it. He'd have known. There was writing on it, his name. Marple's eyes adjusted to the dark. Through the gap, she saw them clearly now. Rachel Grant and her husband Giles. Rachel's hands shook as she held something. A folded paper, its edge catching a sliver of moonlight. Giles snatched it from her. You were supposed to destroy this. Now it's evidence. She flinched back. I didn't mean to. He cut her off, voice hard. Do you want us both hanged? Marple's gloved hand rested against the cold frame of the door. The wind stirred again, pushing faint strands of straw across the floor. Every sound seemed louder in the silence, their breathing, the rustle of fabric, the faint clink of metal. Giles tore the paper into pieces, shoving them into a small oil lamp. Flame caught, flickered, then died as quickly as it came. He cursed softly. Rachel reached for the lamp, hands trembling. Stop, she whispered. Someone will see. No one's awake, he said through his teeth. No one but fools and ghosts. Miss Marple's eyes didn't move. She'd seen the way his sleeve brushed against the shelf, the one where the bottle of tonic had been found. He was erasing more than paper tonight. He was tidying guilt. From somewhere outside came the faint crunch of gravel footsteps approaching, steady and deliberate. Constable Reeves, right on time. Marple stepped back into the shadows, just beyond sight, and raised one hand slightly to halt him. He froze, recognizing her silhouette. His whisper barely carried. "Should I move in, miss?" Her voice was calm, soft as breath. "Not yet, Sergeant," she murmured. Her eyes remained fixed on the pair inside, now scattering ashes across the floor. Let them finish what they came to hide. The night held its breath. The lamp guttered once more, sending a weak orange pulse against the barn walls like a dying heartbeat trying to confess. And in that light, Miss Marple's expression never changed, composed, patient, waiting for the truth to burn itself out. Morning brought no peace to Foxglove Farm. The sun, weak and pale, seemed reluctant to rise over the hedgerows. Inside the barn, the ashes from the night's small fire still lay scattered near the wall. Miss Marple knelt by them, a handkerchief folded neatly in her palm. Inspector Slack stood behind her, arms crossed, his impatience already showing. "I don't see what we're doing here again," he muttered. "They burned the letter. You saw the ashes. Case closed." Marple didn't look up. "Did they burn a letter, Inspector? Or something that merely looked like one?" Slack frowned. "What are you getting at now?" She used the edge of her handkerchief to lift a half-charred scrap. It had curled into itself, fragile as a moth's wing, but a few letters still showed blackened ink clinging to the paper's veins. "Tell me what you see here," she said softly. Slack leaned closer. "Some writing. Can't make much of it. Looks like a list. Numbers?" "Precisely," she said. "And see this margin? The straight line of pencil?" He squinted. "A ledger column?" Miss Marple nodded. "Not a letter, then. Not words of affection or apology. A record. A page torn from the very book we found yesterday." Slack blinked. "The farm ledger?" "The same. The one showing withdrawals. But not just money, Inspector. Look at the figures. Small amounts. Regular intervals. Always the same handwriting." He frowned. "Mrs. Monk?" "Not quite," Marple replied. "This hand is firmer, sharper, more educated. Giles Trent's, I believe. The son-in-law." Slack rubbed his chin. "So he's been stealing from the farm. Borrowing, perhaps. But the trouble is not in the taking, it's in the pretending not to." He frowned harder. "I'm not following." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "You will. When one forges numbers, they must also forge balance. Every theft must appear as payment somewhere else. And here," she gestured to the burned scrap, "the entry shows repayment to Mrs. Monk. An impossible transaction. Impossible how? She had no account, and yet her name appears 3 times. A useful trick, you see, when one needs a scapegoat already inside the house." Slack's eyes widened slightly. "So Trent forged her name, then planted this in the ledger. And when Mr. Grant discovered the lie," Marple continued, "he refused another penny. The quarrel began. The poison followed." Slack let out a low whistle. "Then why burn this page?" Marple placed the fragile scrap on a clean sheet of paper. "Because it would prove premeditation, not accident. Giles Trent was not hiding the crime, Inspector. He was remaking it, shifting guilt from himself to someone else." Slack looked at her sharply. "You mean he?" She rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. "Someone wasn't erasing truth," she said softly. Her eyes lingered on the ashes, the faint scent of ink still clinging to them. They were planting it. The noonlight slanted through the barn windows, turning dust into thin gold threads. Inspector Slack bent low over the threshold, notebook in hand, muttering as he measured the distance between the prints. Beside him, Miss Marple stood quietly, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the floor. "Size 6, Slack said, squinting. "Woman's boot. Mrs. Monk's, no question. Matches what she wears in the kitchen." "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "They do seem to fit." He straightened, satisfied. "Then it's simple." She found the flask, panicked, hid it, and came back later trying to shift blame. "She's been lying from the start." Miss Marple tilted her head, studying the prints. The pattern was clear small, neat, pressed into the dust near the ladder. 2 steps forward, 1 to the side, then another set leading back toward the door. "Tell me, Inspector," she said mildly, "have you ever seen a woman her age climb a ladder without turning her feet first?" Slack frowned. What? She would have faced the ladder naturally. To go up, one turns toward it, and to come down, one turns again. These prints, however, she pointed gently. They face outward away from the ladder toward the yard. He crouched again, grumbling, tracing with his pen. Could be the way she stepped down. Could be, Marple agreed, if she'd gone up at all. But see the dust untouched on the rungs, fresh beneath. No trace of scuffing. No heel marks above the second bar. Whoever left these prints did not climb. They only pretended to. Slack scowled. So, she staged it? Someone did, Marple replied. Likely to make us think she was reaching for the loft. Slack rubbed the back of his neck. Then what was she doing here? Miss Marple moved slowly, stooping to pick up a small scrap of paper caught beneath the feed sack. A corner torn neatly from a label, the word tonic still visible in bold letters. She held it between two fingers, perhaps discovering something she was never meant to see. Slack's eyes narrowed. She said she came in looking for a missing cloth. Indeed, and in doing so, she saw the flask already placed there by someone else. Her prints over his plan spoiled by her timing. He blinked. Then she's innocent. Entirely, Miss Marple said gently. And yet, by chance, she became the perfect decoy. Her loyalty made her silent. Her silence made her suspicious. Slack stared down at the floor again, the pattern of the footprints suddenly clear in his mind. Then who left it there? Trent? Very likely, she murmured. His boots would fit over hers neatly. He could have stepped where she stepped, doubling her path. But he made one error. Slack looked up sharply. What error? Marple's gaze drifted toward the open door, where the wind stirred the dust again. Her voice was calm, deliberate, precise. The footprints faced the wrong way. Everyone gathered in the farmhouse parlor that evening. The air felt heavy, not from warmth, but from what each person feared Miss Marple might say next. Inspector Slack stood near the mantel, arms folded. Dr. Haydock sat beside him, silent but watchful. Rachel and Giles Trent sat apart, she pale and still, he restless, his hands clasped too tightly. Mrs. Monk hovered near the doorway, twisting her apron. Miss Marple sat by the window, a small notebook in her lap, spectacles low on her nose. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather. It began, I believe, with a debt, she said softly. A rather old one, mister. Grant's generosity was well known, but generosity is a muscle when strained too often. It fails. Her eyes moved briefly to Giles. You borrowed from him, Mr. Trent, repeatedly. You told your wife it was a matter of pride, of opportunity, that you'd repay him once your business recovered. But it never did. Giles tried to speak, but her raised hand silenced him. Instead, you began taking from the farm accounts. Small amounts, cleverly disguised, until the ledger betrayed you. Inspector Slack nodded grimly. The forged entries. Just so, Miss Marple continued. Mr. Grant found them. He refused to give you another penny. You quarreled that night, neighbors heard it. You left furious, but returned before dawn. You knew he would rise early, and you knew where he kept his medicine. Rachel gasped softly. That's not true. Miss Marple's gaze turned to her, gentle but unwavering. My dear, you may not have known the full extent, but you did know your husband was desperate. You wrote to your father, asking for help again, the letter he never answered, because by the time it reached him, he was already dying. The room fell utterly silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate. You prepared the poison in tea, Miss Marple went on quietly. But something went wrong. Mr. Grant's final strength allowed him to reach the bell rope. He tried to summon help one last signal. The sound woke the house. She paused, letting the memory settle. Now, most assumed the bell was rung by a dying man, but the rope told another story. Someone greased it, bacon fat, from the kitchen, so that the marks of use, the friction burns, the handprints would not show. Mrs. Monk's eyes widened. Grease? But Yes, Mrs. Monk, Miss Marple said kindly. You did not know your kitchen cloth was taken. That same cloth was later found behind the barn. Used to wipe the handle of a small flask, the one marked with your name. Slack stepped forward. Then Trent tried to frame her? Precisely, said Miss Marple. He planted the bottle. He rewrote the labels. He created confusion, all to make guilt seem domestic, not deliberate. But he forgot one detail. She pointed toward the open doorway, where the faint outline of footprints was still visible in the dust. He stood where she had stood, but he faced the wrong way. He was pretending to copy her steps, yet his fear betrayed him. His boots pointed to escape. Giles rose suddenly, color draining from his face. That's nonsense. Miss Marple didn't flinch. Mr. Trent, the truth is rarely nonsense. It is simply patient, and tonight it has arrived. She closed her notebook gently, the sound small but final. And that's when the bell rope told its final secret. The parlor felt smaller than before, every eye fixed on Miss Marple as if the air itself waited to breathe again. The clock on the mantel ticked with painful precision. Inspector Slack stood stiffly by the door, his notebook closed but his mind sharp. Dr. Haydock leaned against the wall, arms folded, saying nothing. Rachel's hands clutched a handkerchief that trembled in her lap. Giles Trent sat rigid, the color drained from his face, jaw locked tight. Miss Marple sat perfectly still in her chair, the faintest smile touching her lips. Her calm was almost unnatural against the storm of silence in the room. "It is always sad," she began gently, "when love becomes a weapon instead of a comfort, when the very people meant to protect one another find profit in deceit." Her eyes lifted toward Giles. "You thought yourself clever. You believed no one would question a housekeeper with old hands and a tidy conscience. You chose her name because it was simple, her boots because they were near, her silence because she was loyal." Giles said nothing. Rachel turned to him, tears bright in her eyes. "Giles, tell her she's wrong." He didn't move. Only his throat worked once. A swallow, dry and hard. Miss Marple continued, her voice as calm as a prayer. "You knew Mr. Grant's habits. His tea before work, his tonic for the heart. You poisoned one, greased the bell rope to mask your touch, and left before the first light. But your mistake was in thinking guilt could be buried beneath confusion. It cannot. It grows roots even in ash." Rachel's voice cracked. "Please, Giles, say something." Still silence. Inspector Slack took a step forward. "Mr. Trent, I'd advise you to answer." At that, Giles exhaled sharply, the sound of a man whose lies had reached their limit. "She doesn't know everything," he muttered. His eyes darted to Miss Marple. "She's guessing." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "Guessing is merely truth's way of being polite before it enters the room." She opened her small notebook again, reading aloud with calm precision. "Your handwriting on the ledger, confirmed by Dr. Haydock's comparison. Your fingerprints on the flask, though faint, found beneath the grease. And the charred page from the ledger, retrieved from the ashes, the one you thought destroyed. It bears the same tear pattern as the remaining book." Giles's composure broke. He rose abruptly, knocking over his chair. Rachel gasped, half rising. "Giles, please." Slack moved swiftly, hand to his cuffs. But Giles froze, staring at Miss Marple as though she had reached into his thoughts. "You think you've solved it," he said hoarsely. "But you don't know why." Miss Marple's expression softened, though her tone remained steady. "Oh, I do. Not for greed, Mr. Trent, for pride. You could not bear to appear weak before your wife. You would rather destroy what she loved than confess what you owed." That struck like a blow. Rachel's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. "You killed my father. For me?" He turned away, silent now, shoulders shaking. Slack stepped forward, snapping the cuffs shut with finality. "Doctor," Haydock muttered something under his breath, a sigh more than a word. Mrs. Monk wept quietly into her apron. Miss Marple rose, gathering her gloves with care. The fire crackled once in the grate, filling the silence left behind. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, resting briefly on each face, sorrowful, knowing, unflinching. "Truth is like tea," she said softly. "It will always settle clear once you let it stand. Then her gaze stopped. For just a moment, she looked at Rachel. A pause, a stillness, something unreadable passing between them. Her tone dropped lower, one quiet sentence that made the room tighten again. One person here still lies, and they know I know. The village returned to calm as it always did after storms. By the following evening, the sky had cleared, and a quiet drizzle washed the dust from the hedges. Inside Miss Marple's sitting room, the fire burned low, soft and steady. The kettle sang faintly on the hob, and her knitting lay across her lap, half-finished, pink wool looped neatly on silver needles. Inspector Slack sat across from her, hat in his hands, looking half uncomfortable and half relieved. He had come, as he always did after a case, pretending it was only for formality, but truthfully, he wanted her calm voice to untangle what justice could never fully explain. "Well," he said gruffly, "it's all settled then. Trent's confessed. The widow's gone to her sister's. The papers will make a fine story of it. Jealousy at Foxglove Farm. Sounds cleaner than it was." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Stories always do, Inspector. Real life is rather messier. There are stains one cannot quite wash out with tidy headlines." He nodded, staring into the fire. "Never saw it coming. I thought the old housekeeper was the guilty one. Had it all figured wrong from the start. That's the danger of neat conclusions," she said softly. "They fit too comfortably. Real wickedness prefers disguise, good manners, proper habits, well-shined boots." He chuckled quietly. "Still, you saw straight through him. How do you do it, Miss Marple?" "Luck?" "Observation, Inspector," she said, knitting another quiet brow. "Luck is merely truth finding the patient observer. I've seen much of life gardens, gossip, small cruelties disguised as kindness. People think evil arrives in thunder, but it comes softly, like ivy winding itself about the heart until one forgets it ever had roots." Slack looked at her, thoughtful now. "You feel sorry for him?" Miss Marple hesitated only a moment. "No. Pity, perhaps, but not forgiveness. Every sin has its explanation, but not its excuse." The kettle hissed louder. She rose, poured 2 cups of tea, and set one before him. Steam rose between them, thin, fragrant, faintly floral. "Chamomile?" he asked. She smiled. "Not tonight. Something stronger. Ordinary English tea. We've earned it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain tapping gently against the window. Somewhere outside, the church bell tolled the Dallers. Half-hour slow, dignified, final. Slack finished his tea and stood to leave. "At least it's done," he said. "Justice in the end." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but steady. "Justice," she repeated quietly. "Yes. Though I sometimes think justice is not what follows guilt, but what follows truth." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Marple." "Good night, Inspector." When the door closed, she looked toward the window where the reflection of the fire wavered faintly against the glass. She spoke as if to no one. "Wickedness often wears tidy shoes, Inspector," she murmured. "But conscience always leaves muddy prints. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us tonight in this quiet corner of mysteries. Another evening, another truth unearthed beneath the calm surface of village life. It's strange, isn't it, how even the smallest place can hold such heavy secrets, and how Miss Marple always finds the thread no one else sees. Tell me, when did you first sense the truth at Foxglove Farm? Was it the bell at dawn, or the tea that tasted just a little too bitter? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your guesses, your theories, your favorite moment, they make this world of quiet puzzles come alive again. If these mysteries bring you comfort, or simply keep you company through the night, don't forget to subscribe and share a cup of calm with us again next time. Until we meet for another story, may your evening stay peaceful, your tea stay warm, and your truth cool slower than tea.